Well, welcome everyone. This is Andy Yost with the Capacity Building Center for Courts. We are here to have our CIP All Call and go over the 2015 Self-Assessment tool. I'm going to give just a real quick overview of what you all are looking at on the Adobe Connect format, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to Dr. Summers and David Kelly to present the material today. For those of you that have not joined on a Adobe Connect workshop, let me just give you a real quick overview of what you're looking at. Right now, you're logged into a main room, and you see in front of you the PowerPoint slides that we have in the middle of the screen. On the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see an agenda. All the bracketed numbers are the amount of time we have allotted for each agenda item. And know that I have a timer set, so I'll be keeping strict time as we move through today's agenda. In the middle of the screen, you see a chat box. The value of the chat box is that everything that we type into the chat box throughout the call is preserved. So if you have a really insightful or poignant comment or question that you'd like to ask, go ahead and type it into the chat box, and we'll see that it comes up. And if you also just have a good insight that all of us could learn from, type that into the chat box as well. We are able to save the chat box transcript, and at the end of the workshop, we'll send out a summary of the transcript of the chat, a summary of the Q&A and the polling that we're going to do at the end of the workshop, and a recording of the video and audio of the workshop as well. So, again, we invite you to have a conversation in the chat box as we go along so that we can all learn from each other's expertise. The intent of today's workshop is to showcase the CIP, the new self-assessment tool, and solicit some questions from the CIP regarding the tool and the self-assessment process. So what I'd like to do now, before I hand the microphone over to David, is just make sure that everyone is accessing the Adobe Connect room and functioning it. So we're going to do a real quick, simple gradients of agreement interactive test. So what I want everyone in the room to do is, in the chat box down in the bottom middle of your screen, I want you to type in on a scale of 1 to 5 how much you agree with the following sentence. The Cincinnati Bengals will definitely win the World Championship Super Bowl. 5 is, it's absolutely going to happen. There's no way that they lose it. I can see some of you have a broken screen because you're typing in lots of zeros and ones. No, that's great. That's great. Obviously, 0 is they're not going to win. I think you all caught on to that. Wonderful. Good. Okay, so that's good. That says to me that everyone in the group chat is following along, which is great. And know that we'll use that gradients of agreement tool to measure your response to some of the other things that we've said in this workshop, but also in future workshops. So thank you for that. And without further ado, David Kelly. I'm sorry, I lied. What I'm going to do before David walks in is ask everyone to respond to a poll. So I have a poll set up that you should see in the upper right-hand corner. And what I'd like you to do is just read through that question and answer the poll as honestly as possible. And I'll leave 2 minutes open so that everyone gets a chance to respond. You should only respond to one of the options. So 2 minutes, ready, set, go. For those of you that are on the phone but may not be in the Adobe Connect room, the question is, has the annual self-assessment process been valuable to you and your team in helping you to reflect on your work and set priorities for the coming year? And then on a scale of 1 to 5, we have 5, yes, it's very valuable. 4, I think it's pretty valuable. 3, I'm not sure if I think it's valuable. 2, the process has very little value. Or 1, no, the process is not valuable to me and my team. You might just consider what your answer would be there. As we move forward. We'll take just another minute for folks to respond to the poll, and then we'll move forward. All right, so that was about 2 minutes, and it looks like the responses to the poll have slowed down, which is great. And now I'm going to hand the microphone over to David Kelly.
Thanks, Eddie. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to say we're broadcasting live from the ADA, and I'm here with the dream team that is the Center for Courts. So it's fun to all be together today. I want to just take a couple of minutes and revisit the intention for the self-assessment overall, and then from there transition a little bit to a discussion of the form. So I'm really glad to see what looks like some pretty candid responses to the poll. So there were a small number of folks who were honest enough to say they haven't found a whole lot of value in this process so far. Most folks said that it was pretty valuable, and a small number said that it was very valuable. And I think this is a perfect way to start out the call, because what we want to do is to continue to improve this process so that everyone finds it valuable. The purpose of the self-assessment is to create kind of an intentional time on an annual basis for CIP leadership teams to reflect on their work, to think about what it is you were hoping to accomplish, and to take a really honest look at whether or not you accomplished what you wanted to. This process was instituted a few years back now in lieu of your annual program year-end assessment. And I hope that it's improved each and every year since then. It started out fairly crude, and that's because it was basically me designing it alone. But with each of the past few years, more and more folks with better skill sets have gotten involved. And I think we've created a tool that's quite good. So this is an opportunity for you to reflect on your work, but it's also an opportunity for me and the Children's Bureau and for the Center for Courts to get a clearer understanding of what it is you've prioritized, how you've delegated resources, and where you are in understanding and implementing and using continuous quality improvement as a tool. There are a few things we hope to gain as we continue to refine this process. One of them is that we hope to get more accurate and timely data from all of you. We hope to get it in a more uniform way. And we see that as advantageous in that it will allow us to create and make available to you information about trends, a more accurate national picture. It'll also help us in understanding where your needs may lie, where we should consider delegating resources moving forward. And perhaps most excitingly, it'll help us understand where the real innovative efforts are happening and allow us to bring together all of the good work that you're doing so that we can share it more effectively with your colleagues across the country. I think I'll stop there. We have Dr. Summers here today, and she's going to take some time to introduce you to this document, to walk you through it. We'll have plenty of time for discussion, but we're hoping that this will be a more effective, efficient way to report. We also hope it'll be a more effective, efficient tool for you to use to think about how your work is going. And I'll end with a boring administrative item, so I don't forget later. And that's that when you complete the form this year, please email it to your regional program specialist at the Children's Bureau and copy your Center for Courts liaison and me, if you would. I hope that as you're thinking about your assessment this year, you'll reach out to your Center for Courts liaison, use them as a thought partner, and really look forward to learning more about your work. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Summers.
we're going to do a screen share of the new self-assessment tool. So give us just 1 second to bring that up so that you all can see it. Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we sent this out last week so that you could have it ahead of time. And just to let you know, the plan for today is I'm going to walk through this not question by question, but kind of give you an overview of the things that have changed. Some of this is going to be fairly similar to last year. Some of it's very different. So we want to go through and hit the highlights, let you know our thinking process when we set this up, but also logistically some of the ways to complete this. This new one's filled out like a form, so there's opportunities to go ahead and do like checkboxes and things like that that'll expedite the process for us when we're trying to see what everyone's working on and identify the trends for the CIPs. We'll definitely have an opportunity here in just a little bit for Q&A, so make sure you jot down any questions that you have about this entire process so that you can ask us and we can provide clarity back for the group. So to start, I'm going to try not to scroll because it gets a little crazy on your screen. I'm going to start with section 1. So there are 7 sections to the self-assessment. The first section is focusing on CQI analysis of projects. CQI has been one of the main focuses for the last several years. We're trying to find ways to determine what's really working in the field so that we can allocate resources appropriately. But to do that, we really need to know from you how you're integrating this into your work, what you're learning, some of these processes that we think would be very beneficial to you to see what you should be doing, but also so that we can learn as a whole what's helpful. So we set this up a little different. Instead of just asking for a general summary of all your different activities, we set up this specifically so that you could identify 1 or 2 priority area projects from fiscal year 2015 and talk about them in a little bit more depth. And I say 1 or 2, the instructions say 2, but we recognize that some of you might have 1 project that you're really putting most of your resources into and doing CQI around, and that's fine. If you put all your efforts into 1 project, we don't expect you just to identify projects just to have a second one. However, if you have multiple projects, we'd like you to identify 2. They're your highest priority projects for the year and talk about them in a little more depth. To facilitate that, we started putting in some specific questions for you. If you recall, last year we asked you to identify what phase in the process you were. So we've refined our CQI process a little bit. We've been working on our approach so that we have a consistent approach across our work with the CIPs, and we're using consistent language. So all of our liaisons will have the same types of language when they're talking to you about your projects. And we've put those in this form for you this time in 5 distinct phases of your work. You can see most of them on here. Number 5's cut off. Let me see if I can get it on the page for you. So for the projects, what we'd like you to do is think about these specific questions in these 5 areas. Think about your entire process for a specific project that you've worked on. We want you to think about how you identified this as an issue. So in step 1, identifying and assessing the needs. How do you know you needed to do this? What was your theory of change? What do you think that making a change in this area is going to lead to? What kind of outcomes? How do you think this will improve practice? How did you identify a solution? Did you create a new program, or were you wanting to change programs? How did you implement the project into practice? Who did you have to bring in to do that? How did you think about the fidelity of the project? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? And then think about how you monitor or plan to monitor, evaluate, or assess the project. So for each of these, the expectation is not that you're going to list out every single question on here and then have a little answer. It's that you will think about all of these questions and respond in a narrative way to identify the project. So from this, the expectation is, hey, we did some work around quality hearings. Here's how we identified the need. Here's the data that we had around that. We developed a theory of change that was, if we improve the quality here, it would better, engage parents. Here's the solution we selected. Here's how we started the implementation. We recognize that you might be at an early phase. So out of these 5 phases here, you might only be on step 3. You might have put a lot of resources into a project, but you're only right now looking at how we're going to change this in the future or how we're going to identify the appropriate intervention, and that's fine. So if you say this is where we are in the process, but we have a plan to implement it after we select it, or we've been already thinking about evaluation, that's fine. We recognize not everyone's going to be completely finished with all 5 of these, but these are the things we'd like you to think about when you're describing your work in these areas. And again, we just list these questions over and over again for Project 1 and Project 2, but it's kind of guiding questions for you to think about the CQI process. We also ask you to identify, is this going to be a priority project for you in 2016? So if you're reflecting on your 2015 work and you put a lot of resources into this, are you continuing this work? Is it still a priority? Or if you've made it all the way through step 5 and you're focusing your efforts somewhere else, clearly it may not be for the next year, but it'll help us to know. You've given us all this information. Are you continuing work around this? And then question 7 related to that is, would you like a CQI consult around that project? And that's really, would you like some additional assistance from us in helping to move this project forward in some way? So for the first 2, we have these, and you'll notice on your screen, these are actual checkboxes. They're not just boxes. You can go in and check or uncheck them with just the click of your mouse. And that's what we're hoping for with this new form, is that instead of a lot of extra narrative where we ask you to say yes or no, and you might say yes, no, or maybe, we actually have a forced choice here. We want an answer, is this a yes or a no? And this will make it easier, we hope, for you in filling this out, so you don't have to add narrative for every single question. But also when we look back on the projects, we can say, oh, you know, I'm working with my state. They talked about this project. They said it's going to be a priority area next year. They'd like some assistance around it. And it's very clear-cut, easy for us to understand. It'll help us get that data quicker, and we can facilitate getting the resources that you need to be able to continue this work. That's what the first 2 questions are. They're all in section 1, but they're really both a repetition of the same thing. We want you to think about the CQI process and work through these steps to identify where you are, what you've done, and where you would like to go in that process. And I want to say any questions, but if you'll wait to the end, we'll get to that part for questions. Section 2 is new this time as well, at least question 1 of section 2. If you recall in the last years, we've asked you to talk about whether you've done projects or activities in specific areas. We've continued that. One of the things that we noticed in reviewing responses was that there was a lot of training, and sometimes there was a lot of detail about trainings that have been developed around specific areas, and other times it might just say, we developed a training around this. We thought it might be nice to have a place in there for you to put all of your trainings in one spot so you can think a little bit more about the purpose of the trainings and how you plan to assess those and how you're using those to move your work forward. So we built this little table here. For training specifically. We've identified these were the priority areas that were identified primarily from the 2013 self-assessment. They're the same areas from last year, except we included the trafficking work since that was a priority area in this past year. And basically for each of these, we're asking if you can go through and say yes, no, I did a priority area. I did a training on this. We developed something on ICWA, per se. If you did something on ICWA, we'd like to know what the thought process was in developing that training. Who was your target audience? Was it just for judges? Was it for attorneys? Was it for multidisciplinary team? And just fill that, and that could be super short. The target audience was judges. That's all we really need to know. What were the intended training outcomes? What was the purpose of the ICWA training? Is it to increase the tribal court collaboration? Is it really to learn more about the law? What was the purpose of the ICWA training in your jurisdiction? And then how did you evaluate it? And this might end up being something like, oh, we did some satisfaction surveys, or we did court observation. Just what did you do to evaluate this training? And then if you didn't, this is a good opportunity to think about, well, what was the purpose of our training? How will we know if that was effective in meeting our goals? Will these ways that you evaluated the training actually measure the intended outcomes of the training? And if not, is that something that you want to think about for future trainings, or something that you'd like to talk to your liaison about in terms of building your capacity to better evaluate your trainings in the future and how you want to apply that information? There's an opportunity as well at the bottom to include any other trainings relevant to the work. We want to be inclusive with the activities that you've done. So if you have something else that you designed a training around and you'd like to talk about it, feel free to do so within the table. I know the space is fairly small in a lot of these. Partly that's intentional because we'd like you to think about your responses and be fairly concise in reporting to us so that we can see what you've done, but also in thinking about it, is there a nice, concise way to portray this? Did we look at the target audience? Did we make these types of decisions? And if you're having some trouble answering the question, it's something to think about in terms of the process that you went through to develop a training or determine that a training was needed. So we put this table in there specifically for those purposes, to think a little bit more critically about the trainings, but also so that the trainings could be all in one place, and you can report those here instead of interspersed throughout other projects and activities. The next couple questions should look very familiar to you. This is basically the format from earlier years in terms of, did you have a data project? And can you describe the data project? And what stage of work are you in? On the first page, we identify these 5 new phases for you. There's also an appendix to this that has definitions for those 5 phases. And so we're asking you to think about the work you've done in these different areas and put it in a work stage. It is a forced choice. You might be in multiple stages of the work. Choose the latter of the stage. So if you're still doing a little bit around assessing needs, but you've already started developing your theory of change, select theory of change. This was one of the things that we noticed last year, that some people might be in multiple phases of the work. Go ahead and select the latest phase when you're thinking about the work, but you can always include that in the other pieces when you're talking about what you've done. So for each of these, we describe what types of projects we're talking about. So for data projects, are you doing administrative data sets like app cards? Are you working on data dashboards? Are you doing data sharing efforts with the agency or the school? Think about these different things that might be classified as a data project. And then we ask, do you have anything in fiscal year 2015 that you'd like to report on? And again, we'd like you to pick yes or no. And just to clarify, it is perfectly okay for you to say no, we haven't done work in a specific area. Rather than try to make other projects fit into your data project area, we'd really like it if you would just say, we have a project that collects some data, but it's really focused on well-being or hearing quality. I think it best fits there. And put your description of projects in one specific area. That was something that we noticed in the past, that often projects are written repeatedly throughout. So, yes, I did a data project and we looked at AFCARs. Yes, I did a hearing quality project. We looked at AFCARs. Yes, I did a well-being project. We looked at AFCARs data. And so it's really the same work, but you're looking at multiple different topical areas. Our preference would be that you identify the one that best fits your work and categorize that project, program, or activity in that subsection for us. That doesn't mean that you can't do other work. For example, let's say you say, yes, I have a data project. Okay, and I'm using AFCARs to examine timeliness, which is not a terribly good example, but so I'm going to write it down here. That is harder to see up there. If you put it here as this is what you want to focus on, it's listed as a data project, and in your description you say timeliness, we will link it for you to the timeliness section, like we're doing in the self-assessment report that you guys will get next week. So we have the capacity to link those projects together and say this one overlaps with other areas. But if you select where it best fits, then we don't have replication. And when we go through and do kind of a count to look where trends are, we won't say that there's 100 data projects when really there's 50 data projects and 50 timeliness projects. It'll really help us to identify where we want to allocate resources and where you guys are really interested in doing more work or have activities that would be worth sharing with the others. So this will really help us out. But it'll also save you some time as you don't have to report something repeatedly throughout the process. So for each of these, we're going to ask you, do you have a project in this area? If you do, we want a short description, concise, typically, a couple sentences, enough to let us know what you're doing in the area, and if it crosses several areas. So you could say we're doing data sharing and we're getting data on education and well-being and permanency through this. That's all fine to say in a description, and we will use those keywords to link to other projects. We want you to do a subcategory for it, and each of these are specific to the items in the top. So for the data projects, for example, it says data projects include blah, blah, blah. Everything listed on that list will be in this subcategory drop-down box. So this use of ask cards or stack with data. And then what stage are you in? And again, we have those same 5 stages that you saw on the first page that are also described for you in the appendix. And if you're saying, I'm really just starting to look at this data to see if we have a need in the area, you might pick identifying and assessing needs. So for each of these boxes, you should have a drop-down, a description, and then both the categorization and the work stage for this. And that's what they're all set up to look like. So for hearing quality, for example, here's your space to write a description. Here's an opportunity to categorize it, hearing quality, and these are the categories you should be used to from last year. There's always an opportunity for other if you think it fits best under hearing quality, but we don't have the subcategory. We only are identifying the most commonly cited subcategories, so there's always room for others in this area, but picking the category that you think it fits best in, and then identifying the work stage. And maybe you come down to timeliness and you say, nope, we don't have anything around timeliness or permanency right now. And you just skip it. If you say no, you don't have to fill anything else in. Just move down to the next one. We have this for all the same categories that you're used to seeing all the way through. We've added a new one for you on the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act. And we've added some subcategories, but again, since we don't have data from what's being done, we put these in. There might be lots of others, but anything you're doing on this area, you can identify, give us a concise description, and then identify what stage you're in the process. Thinking about it in these terms should be helpful both to you and to us, because when you're looking at it, you say, oh, this is what we're doing around trafficking. We've just identified that we want to do some data collection around our runaway youth. We're going to categorize the project here as we're focusing on runaways, and then what stage am I in? I'm early in the process. Well, that tells us, and tells your liaison, and tells the CQI people that on the CBCC team, here's where they are in this process. What can we do to help them get to the next stage in the work? It can also tell us, wow, we have 20 states in fiscal year 2015 that were focusing on runaway youth and are early in the process. Maybe there's something that we should think about, work on. Maybe there's something we could do at the CIP meeting or some kind of product we can create that'll help move the states collectively to the next phase in this work. Or maybe there's some resources we can provide around this. So it'll be a great opportunity for you to think about where you are in the process and communicate that in a way that we can help determine where the field is and see what we can do to help move everything forward. Section 3 is new. We're asking what your priority areas are. We do ask you to identify 2 priority areas for fiscal year 2016. And again, this is to help you think through the process, how you want to prioritize your work, but also to help us see what the trends are in the nation and where we can best use our resources to help. And these are, again, just straight little check boxes. Easy peasy. Okay, section 4, we talked about, you had these questions last year, so I'm not going to go through them. We've just asked if anything's changed related to your collaboration and participation in child welfare program planning. If you've got any technical assistance, what challenges or barriers you found related to both the CFSR process and then participation in the CFSP and APSR, as well as how you might be involved in the Child Welfare Agency CQI efforts. So for this, we just want to know what you've been working on related to this, if you've had any struggles. It's an opportunity for you to think about how that's going and what you might need to work better with them, if that's something that you'd like to move forward with in your state. Section 5 is also a repeat with some new shiny questions that we thought would be really helpful for us to think about in CQI. So we want to know generally about the CQI process overall, how you're doing that with your work. We did learn when we reviewed the self-assessments that Some of you are very descriptive in how you integrate CQI into your entire approach to the work, and specifically with other projects, and others focus specifically on one or two projects, and this is what we do with CQI. So we'd like to hear how you're using this process and integrating into your work, as well as what challenges that you have with that. So, we'd also like you to think about the capacity areas that we could help build your capacity in the next year. How can we increase your knowledge, resources, infrastructure related specifically to some of these topical areas? We have opportunities here for other, but this is kind of to narrow down. If we could do one, well, there's three, but really if we could do something to help you, what would it be? What do you really need? So it's an opportunity to think through that, give us some ideas so that we can work with you. Section 6 is all new. This year, it's basically a self-assessment within your self-assessment process. It's, you can guess that I created it. It's a nice little, it's a survey with a Likert scale. It's got disagreement. It's basically an opportunity to collect some data. We really want to know where you are. And we ask some questions generally at the CIP meeting. How helpful was this? You know, how familiar are you with CQI? Is it something that you need help with? And we have some of the states that say, you know what, I'm all over the CQI, but I'm not really doing much around this. And so this is a great opportunity for us just to get a baseline nationally where you are and what your needs are. So it'll give us some baseline data, a place to start to see what we can do to enhance and build the capacity in future years. And it is very quantitative, so selecting a box on these scales for us, related specifically to your attitudes or agreement with some statements, how often you engage in very specific activities about using data or working in collaboration, and then thinking about generally the level of collaboration you have with different entities, like how often, what type of collaboration or what type of relationship do you currently have with the Child Welfare Agency or with the travel courts, with juvenile justice, some of these different system stakeholders and partners. And this is really interesting because it helps us think about where we need to enhance collaborative efforts or coordinated efforts and what people are doing. I know I've had questions from states before asking, well, you know, who works with the Juvenile Justice Agency or who has a good relationship with the state? People want to see that model and they would like to know who's doing this really well. And this will give us an opportunity to take a look at that and see what's important to the CIPs and where we can, again, focus some effort. And then last but not least, we have revamped the timeliness section. We've made an effort to try to make it a little bit easier to report the measures. We also dropped one of the measures as a required measure. So some of the feedback that we've got from the CIPs has been these may not be the absolute best measures for us to report. Well, we'd still like some consistency in reporting. We'd like to know what people are able to report. We'd like people thinking about this and collecting data to use in a meaningful way. So we've kept all the performance measures that are part of the toolkit in here. So time to first permanency hearing, time to termination of parental rights, petition, time to TPR, and time to permanent placement. So we have those up at the top as your required measures. I'm doing air quotes over here with required measures, but you can't see that. Then we've included some optional measures for you. The feedback that we got was time to permanent placement is not as helpful to us unless you break it out by the different types of permanency. So we've added those on here. What's the time to reunification, the time to adoption, the time to guardianship? What's the time to these very specific things? We kept in as an optional measure the time to subsequent permanency hearings because many of you are collecting that and you might be using that in a very important way. So please continue to add it as an optional measure if that's useful to you. We've also set up so it's just a straight, fiscal year 2013, 2014, and 2015. Clearly, if you're not able to report for some of those years, you can write that in there. But we've set it up so that we can look at some trends over time so that you can look at the trends in your data over time, over a 3-year period, and see what's changed. We've also kept the column in there to look at the CIP projects that are targeting these measures so that you can think about how are we using this? Do we have a project that's supposed to reduce the time to permanent placement, and what is it? And that way you can think a little bit more about how these measures might be useful and meaningful to you. Also included here at the very bottom of the page, the optional measures. Some of the feedback that we got was, you know what would be really interesting to me? Reentry. What are the percentage of cases that reenter within 1 year? So we've included that again as an optional measure. It would be great if people are able to report this, at least start thinking about how useful this might be in the work that you do. Again, at the very end down here, question 2. Because the feedback that we got was that these may not be the most useful measures to us, we've asked you what measures do you collect that you find particularly useful. You know, what do you collect within your data that might be something that you use in your CQI process to determine effectiveness? What are the things that really matter to you? And then if you're collecting data on some of those and you would like to share that, there's an opportunity to do so. We also asked within this, are you collecting data on quality legal representation or quality court hearings that you'd like to discuss here in the report or share? Those have been listed as some of the priority areas, and we have a lot of states doing work in those areas. So it would be great to see what the diversity of measures are, what you're most interested in collecting, and how you're using that within your practice. Finally, you just have a nice little appendix with some definitions in here of different types of practice and your stages of work. Now that I've been talking for 20 minutes, I'm going to open up the floor for an opportunity for some questions. And we're going to do this in a very specific way. As soon as I figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
Hang tight. One second, folks. Yep.
There we go.
So now that we've provided an overview of both the purpose and the layout of the self-assessment tool, we'd like to provide an opportunity for you all to ask some questions of the experts that are in the room here. So we're going to invite you to ask questions one of two ways. For those of you that are shy like me and you don't like to talk a lot, what I would suggest that you do is you type in the big white box that you see in the middle, sort of on the right-hand side of your screen that says Q&A. At the bottom of that box, there's just a little blank space. You can type a question in there. If you type the question in there, know that we will see it, Alicia will see it, David will see it, and we'll be able to just read the question out loud and then respond over the phone so that everyone can have the benefit of both your question and the answer. For those of you that are a little bit more courageous, if you'd like to just ask a question over the phone, we invite you to do that. In order to do that, you have to take one little text step. At the top of your screen, you'll see a little icon of a person with their hand raised. If you want to ask a question over the phone as opposed to typed in, just click on that person with their hand raised, and we'll see a little icon show up next to your name, and we'll call on you over the phone and say, for example, now, Casey, I know you haven't raised your hand, but suppose that you had. We could say, I see that Casey has a question. Casey, would you like to go ahead and ask your question, and then we can answer it over the phone. So, again, the two ways that you can ask questions are you can either, A, type the question into the Q&A box, and we'll read it aloud and answer it, or B, you can raise your hand by clicking the icon, and we'll call on you over the phone, and you can ask your question, and we'll answer it. So it looks like we have one question already, and this question is from Angela, and the question is this. Did I hear correctly that the questions related to data on the self-assessment will be the format to submit our measures? No other report is needed?
This is David. Yes, that's correct. If you would like to send supplemental materials, you're welcome to. But all that is required now is what's included in the form.
For those of you that are on the phone, we're going to do a quick unmute of everyone, and then we'll just ask you if you're not going to ask a question, go ahead and mute yourself again using *6. And then you can raise your hand.
The leader has unmuted your line.
Looks like we have a couple more questions that have shown up as well. I'll read those out loud. The first one says, I'm not shy, but it strikes me that the training categories are the same or very similar as the projects. We've supported trainings that are not necessarily priority projects. Is it okay to check a topic as a training and not continue to describe it in the project section?
This is Alicia. Absolutely. We'd like you to be as efficient as possible in these responses. And so if it was just a training and you don't have any additional activities or programs in the area, just put it in the training box. That's what we'd really like to see this round, is that you think about where this fits best and put it there instead of in multiple places.
And it looks like Julie has raised her hand and has a question. Julie, go ahead.
Thanks. I am, Andy and David, as you know, data always confuses me because I'm new to all of this. But we are, well, in the data project section, I'm thinking we're launching this new pre-hearing conference project that I've told both of you a little bit about, and it kind of hits on various things like we are sharing data with our Child and Family Services Division. We hope that it affects timeliness of hearings, and we also hope that these pre-hearing conferences that will be required for every abuse and neglect case in the participating judicial districts will promote family engagement. So how do I? But we're not embarking on this pre-hearing conference project specifically as a data project, but we are going to collect data for it. So I'm a little confused as to how I address the data. Are you working on a data project question?
Well, that's a really good question, Julie. So, this is a pretty complex and interesting and exciting project. And my advice would be just look at the options you have there and choose which one seems to best capture the work. So you may feel that the hearing quality section is the right place to describe that process.
Okay.
Rather than the data section.
Okay.
But what we are hoping to do here is reduce repetition, because it's not a good use of your time. And we got pretty clear feedback that previous questions had been repetitious. So there's not necessarily going to be a clear right answer all the time.
Okay.
Pick the one that feels most accurate to you.
And I think it's okay to, in the description, talk about, okay, maybe you think it fits best in hearing quality to say we're collecting data around this, and it'll also include some timeliness or well-being measures. And that way it's a nice link for us. Even though it fits best under hearing quality, we know that it's going to touch on these other categories as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. We have another question that was typed into the chat box here from Oregon. It says, the form says, quote, FY. Are you wanting federal fiscal year October to September or fiscal year July to June?
So this question comes up a lot, and I apologize for the confusion. But we ask for, well, let me put it this way. So the funds are distributed according to the federal fiscal year. So it's most helpful to know what was accomplished during that period. I understand that most states operate on a different calendar, but as best you can for uniformity, please use the federal fiscal year.
Great. It looks like Jenny has raised her hand. Jenny, you want to go ahead with your question? You might be muted, Jenny, so we can't hear you, so try one more time. All right, we'll come back to you, Jenny. I see that your hand is raised. In the meantime, we'll go to Veronica. She asks, for the activities that are discussed as the second priority or number 2 priority project, do we have to identify them again in Section 2?
No. No, I think if you put them in as a CQI project, we know it's something you did in federal fiscal year. These are other activities and projects. If this was one of your main priorities and you describe it at the beginning, there's no need to describe it again.
Okay, and Jenny, I see that you raised your hand again. If you are on the phone, we're happy to take your question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, you bet.
Okay, Melaine Malcolm, our data analyst, is going to ask the question.
Hi, so this is Massachusetts. We had a question. What data goes into the columns? Are you looking for the median days or like the percentage of cases meeting the time standard?
Another good question. So it depends on what you're using. To the greatest extent practicable, we are encouraging folks to use median days, or we have historically. That being said, some of you have designed your systems to calculate the measure in a different way. And we want to make sure above all else that the measure you're using is useful to your program. So median days, if you have it, and that's useful to you. If you have another form of calculation, you're free to use that. A brief explanation of what you're doing.
Okay, thank you. And our second question is, if we have baseline FY 2012 data, do we just enter in a new column in the chart, or do we just not include that data?
If you have extra data that you want to report, we are always happy to take it. So yeah, just add an extra column.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. We have another question from Christine here. It's a data question. She writes, challenged by using entry cohorts and reporting within a federal fiscal year, is it okay to report based upon a calendar year, which is our entry cohort years? And last year, the baseline was 2012 and 2011 for TPR timeliness, since we had to wait 24 months. Seems odd to me to change the baseline year. Is there a reason for this?
For data, use whichever year makes the most sense for you. For other projects, try to stick as close to the federal fiscal year as you can.
Okay. We have another question from Katie. When is the self-assessment due?
It's always due at the end of December. And without looking at a calendar, it's either the 29th or the 30th, the closest working day to the end of December. I'm looking at a calendar now. So Tuesday the 29th.
Okay. It looks like Judy has a question. Could you remind us of where we can locate the contact information for our liaison for the Capacity Building Center so we can send our report to him or her?
Yes, I think you can expect that the liaison will reach out to you as a follow-up to this call to see if there's anything you'd like to discuss with the self-assessment. But also, we can put something out on the listserv that includes everyone's contact information.
All right. And it looks like Sherry is asking a question. Page 4, number 2. What is DCSP, the checkbox to the right of ICWA?
It's the domestic child sex trafficking. Sorry, I should have spelled that out. It's spelled out later in the document. That is what it is.
Well, all the lines are open right now. If anyone has a question, feel free to type it in or raise your hand. We'll wait a few seconds here, maybe more than a few seconds, to let people consider what they might ask. Looks like Jenny has raised her hand. Jenny, go ahead. We might have you muted again there, Jenny. So we'll come right back to you. Julie also has her hand raised. So Julie, go ahead with your question.
Okay. I have a question about the timeliness data and performance measurement. I got interrupted here and I missed something. So on the measures, are those data that you want just statewide?
It varies, Julie, according to what resources you have available. So there are some states that report on a discrete number of counties. Mm-hmm. Others that have more resources or greater data capacities report statewide. So it's up to you and your team to decide what's feasible. We do ask that you think about what it might take to be able to do it statewide. and try to be somewhat planful about the possibility of expansion.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Jenny, are you on the line there?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we do. Go ahead with your question.
Okay. My question is, under the trainings, I noticed you used two different verbs. One was worked on, and then you went to conducted. And so worked on might mean that we are helpers in providing the training, but we're not really the main providers of it. And the other might be that, we support someone to go to a training, like to the White House conference on sex trafficking or something. So which trainings do you want us to list there? Only the ones that we completely do, or ones that our partners do and we help support, or what?
We like the ones that you completely do. So sending someone out for a training opportunity, it is not quite the same to us as making your own, like training on hearing quality or ICWA or any of those pieces. So we like the ones that you fully support, engage in, conduct yourself, as opposed to opportunities that you participate in.
Okay.
Let me add a little bit more. We're not envisioning this as a section where you would report that you sent folks to national conferences or to training opportunities elsewhere. We're really wanting to get a sense of what are you investing resources in creating and offering yourself. And that could be something collaborative with the Child Welfare Agency or another partner.
Okay, yeah, that's what we do mostly is we work with them, and then, they do it, but we help, make sure they cover the topics we want covered and that sort of thing. But we're not actually registering the people at it, usually.
Right. But we'd be interested in that effort.
Okay.
Sending someone to a conference or training hosted by the ABA or NCJ, SCJ, or the National Center for State Courts is not what we're shooting for in this section.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Jane, I see that your hand's raised. I'm going to go to one question that Christine asked, and then I'll come back to you. So Christine asks, I know it's optional to report on the time to emancipation. Is that a measure about aging out, or is it specific for states that have emancipation statute, which we do not?
It's a measure specific to aging out, so not intending to reflect statutory emancipation.
And Jane, I see that you put your hand down. Do you still have a question you'd like to ask? Jane, you might be on mute, so try unmuting and ask one more time.
Sorry, and mistakenly, we don't have a question.
Okay, no problem. All right, looks like Judy has a couple questions here. First of all, in Section 6, should those agree and disagree questions be answered in the voice of the CIP manager or the state CIP staff as a whole or something else?
So there's a couple. The I question should be the CIP manager who's filling it out. The we question should be considered collectively as the CIP as a whole. If that makes sense to you. So when you're filling this form out and you say, I have a good understanding of CQI, that might be different than the CIP engages in these activities or does these things.
So the I are specific to the director or coordinator, and the we reflect more your multidisciplinary task force.
All right, so the lines are open again. We have a few more minutes here. If anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to type it into the Q&A box or just raise your hand and we'll call on you. Take just a few more seconds here. All right. Well, you must have wrote down all the times on my agenda on the first slide setup that we had because we're officially 1 minute ahead, I'm happy to say. So we'll go ahead and close now. But before we do, we'd like to first of all just express our gratitude. Thank you for joining us. Those that were on both the phone and Adobe Connect or both. Hopefully this process is helpful for you, and we appreciate your patience as we work out the kinks on the Adobe Connect side. And with that in mind, we'd like to know what you think about this format. So the question that we have for you in the bottom right-hand corner is just a little bit of our own CQI. So the question is, was this format useful to you? So if you could just take a second to respond to the poll. A 5 would be yes, the format was super engaging and useful. I loved it. A 4 would be it was pretty cool. Yeah, it was pretty good. You're all getting better at this Adobe Connect thing. Can you tell, by the way, this is an Andy poll, not a Dr. Summers poll. 3 is, nah, it was fine, I guess. 2 is, it was about the same as a normal phone call for me. I don't think Adobe Connect adds much value. And 5 is, I didn't find it useful at all. We should do something else. While you all are responding to the poll, David has just a few closing comments.
Yeah, I too would like to thank you for your time this afternoon and your candid thoughts and questions. We hope to keep making this experience more valuable for everyone. And I'll be working over the next several months on the new program instruction, trying to streamline things further, reduce the burden on you, while at the same time increasing the quality of information that we're able to learn and share. So I hope that this will be an important tool in that process. And I really, again, encourage you to have a conversation with your Center for States liaison about this process. Have a conversation with your multidisciplinary task force about this process, and really use it as a time to think critically about your work and how we can best support you in it. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'll leave the poll open until 3 o'clock, and I will be in the chat room as well. If you have any questions, last-minute questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to go ahead and ask those. Otherwise, you can log out, and thanks for joining us.